Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. This show is brought to you in partnership with the Witherslack Group, experts in special education and care, and John Catt Educational, leading publishers of books, directories, educational guides and magazines specifically aimed at schools in the UK and beyond. Enjoy the podcast. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Late Show on Teachers Talk Radio. Delighted that everybody is here for this one. Our questions tonight focus around Oak National Academy and the future of Oak National Academy, particularly in light of a letter that was sent by a group of individuals to Gillian Keegan this last week. About Oak, mostly complaining about it. So in the first half of the show tonight, I've got Mary Bousted and I've got Caroline Wright, who's also going to be joining us. Just to give people who don't know and are sort of listening to this for the first time, a little bit of background on Oak and what Oak is. Oak National Academy was set up during the COVID pandemic, as a sort of, I guess, like a one-stop shop of resources, particularly video resources for teachers who were teaching during the pandemic. So we're going back now sort of 2020 time. Matthew Hood was the principal, and it was set up as an all-in-one package of curriculum resources aimed at teachers during the pandemic. That was its original sort of form, and more or less, it's kind of stuck to that. But obviously, since 2020, things have developed further. It's obviously coming out of the pandemic. Oak then needed to secure its future, its funding, its model. And that's where the debate has come in around what Oak should be, how it should be funded, who should control it, and so on and so forth. So that's sort of where we're up to with Oak National Academy. The government, the DfE, have agreed to fund Oak, and it's become sort of an arm's length body with funding from the government, I believe. I've read different sort of articles that have stated different things on this, but that's sort of where I think we're at with it. Now, there are those who criticize Oak. We're going to talk to two of those people in a second. I've requested Mary in as a speaker. I'll also request Caroline in as well. And we're going to be speaking to them in the first half of the show. They both, in their letter, which was a very sort of strongly worded letter, directed at the Education Secretary, and specifically it's called essentially for the defunding of Oak National Academy. Now, when we put the tweets out about this show, we got a mix of responses. We got people who were saying Oak is really useful for us as teachers. We still use it. It's great. We got others who were completely the opposite of that. Let me read you just while we're waiting for Mary. I think Mary's joined now. Good evening, Mary.
Good evening. Sorry, I'm learning new technology here.
Hey, we all are. Let me just, before I ask you, sort of introduce you and let you talk for a bit, let me read you the letter, or certainly a bit of it, that you signed to the Education Secretary, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Dear Gillian, we the undersigned welcome you to your role as Secretary of State for Education. We wish to draw your attention as a matter of urgency to the decision taken by your predecessor to allocate £43 million of funding to the incorporation of Oak National Academy into an arm's length body, an ALB. This funding decision was taken before the October fiscal event and subsequent increased pressure on the public purse. Following Thursday's autumn statement, we urge you and the Chancellor to invest this funding directly in schools rather than in the establishment of a new 80-person strong Quango under the control of the ministers of the day. It goes on, if I can get my next bit of the letter, but it goes on to talk about a range of different issues around Oak, but that's the crux of it. You want the funding to stop, and it says here, we support the Department for Education's mission to reduce teacher workloads and to improve accessibility to high quality curriculum products. Yet in its present form, Oak will not achieve these ambitions and vital public funding will be wasted. And then it talks about the fiscal challenges at the moment, and so on. Now, Mary, can I ask you maybe just to give us a little bit more information about this letter and where it's come from, and can you sort of paint a picture for me around the key aspects of the letter?
Well, the letters come from the signatories, of which the NEU is one. Kevin and myself are two of the signatories, but we sign on behalf of the union. And the issue around the letter is our increasing concern that what was set up as a means of helping teachers during COVID, particularly teaching online remote lessons, is being given significant amounts of government funds in order to develop a curriculum in every core and foundation subject over a series of years. We don't see that is a good use of public funds. We have severe doubts about the suitability and quality of what will be produced on a very demanding timetable. But more than that, we have concerns about what could very quickly become a monopoly in resources that teachers use. Now, or that teachers, feel they must use. Now, Oak have denied that, and the government's denied it. They're talking very much about curriculum autonomy, but you have to see Oak within the context of big forces which are acting together to constrain what teachers think they can do in the classroom. That's around the assessment system and the both at primary and secondary, the accountability regime. It's also around what Ofsted is now moving to, which is Ofsted research, Ofsted curriculum research, which is highly contested, which is promoting a model of the application of cognitive science to subjects, much of which is deeply dubious. And then you've got the DfE coming in with DfE backed, because the DfE are backing them with significant funds curriculum. So, we think that there are worries about that, and we think that this should have been, before Oak was given £43 million, we needed more research. There has been some research, but not enough, on A, the quality of the materials, B, their use in the classroom, and C, what are the possible effects of funding a model in this way. And we're not the only ones to share those concerns. There's, those concerns are shared by a wide variety of educational institutions and organisations.
Okay, thanks. I want to ask you, I want to dig in a little bit more into this sort of, because what you're kind of talking about there is pedagogy, is it not? You're talking about the resources themselves and the way they are used in teaching. Would that be right? Mary, hello? Have I lost you? Maybe. Is Caroline there? Is anyone there?
Hello, I'm here. It's Caroline. Hello, hi Caroline. There.
Yeah, I think Mary's dropped. We'll come back to Mary in a minute. Caroline, you are the Director General of BESA, which is the British Educational Suppliers Association. What's your gripe with Oak?
Well, first of all, what I would say is I'd like to say thank you to the teachers who put their hard work and efforts into Oak during the pandemic. I think it was a really valuable and vital resource during a time of national crisis. It was absolutely the right thing to do. And, hats off to Ed Vanker from the Reach Foundation and the other Multi-Academy Trust, John Coles, etc., who worked hard to make something get off the ground so quickly, much like other organisations who did that. So I don't have a problem with Oak from the sense of the work they did during the COVID pandemic, and nor do I have an issue with those resources that were paid for by the taxpayer effectively remaining available for teachers and pupils to use during, snow days and home days. But what I do have an issue with, and our members are very worried about, is this politicisation of Oak and changing something that was right and good and really valuable during the pandemic into something to deliver a political ambition. The decision to move Oak from what it was, a collaborative group of individuals working effectively with industry and subject associations and others, into a government quango that has an army of 80 members of staff policing what's going to be used in the curriculum. It was unevidenced, it's unwanted when you get onto the detail of who wants and needs it within the teaching community, as Mary was saying, and it's unfair because the government didn't follow due process when they set it up. So that's the issue that BESA has been trying to raise and trying to work with government to address.
Mary, I don't know if you're still there. It sounds like you're having a fight in the kitchen at the moment. I hope everything's okay.
Everything's fine. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can just hear a lot of pots and pans like bashing over people's heads.
Well, right, okay. I've moved out from that. I've moved out from the site of that war that's going on in the kitchen.
Listen, I was going to ask you there before you dropped out, and Caroline, I'll come back to you in a few moments. But Mary, I was going to ask you about is one of your gripes with Oak? I want to sort of make absolutely clear from what you said to get that clarity. The pedagogy that it promotes, is that one of your issues?
That is one of the issues. The other issue is the content of the Oak curriculum. We don't know what that will be. But the other issue is quality. I mean, they've been set a ridiculous timetable to get curriculum materials throughout all the stages for the 6 subjects.
Yeah, I think you've dropped again there, Mary. Unfortunately, I don't know whether you're near Wi-Fi or oh, maybe you've come back. Hello? Hello. You're just dropping in and out, Mary, I think.
I'm really sorry. Let me just try to go somewhere else.
Yeah, don't worry. I don't know where. Yeah, try and get as near to a router as possible.
Yeah, well, you see, the Wi-Fi is off at the moment because we're just changing our connector. So anyhow, I'm now. Is that any better?
Well, hopefully, we'll soon find out. Yeah. So go on. Sorry, carry on. You were saying about
there are 3 things. There's concern about DFE condoned pedagogy. Because Oak will be supposedly an arm's length body, but fully funded by the DFE. There's concern about the quality of the materials that they'll produce because it's an incredibly tight timescale. And there's concern about the content as well. It's not the DFE's job to finance the curriculum and pedagogy on this scale. It's just not their job. And that should be, that is with a profession which is already feels it has some of the lowest amount of control over the classroom, what happens in the classroom in the OECD.
I guess I want to ask you, first of all, because you mentioned those 3 elements. So I want to sort of try and break those down. So with regards to the style of it, I'm wondering what would be, if you're going to produce digital content for teachers, right? So digital content to help a teacher teach material. What I'm trying to work out is how that content could be produced differently from what it is now, regardless of who it's created by. Let's sort of take who it's created by out for a minute and just say, how would digital content be created to make it better in your view?
Well, I'm not an expert on that. I'm sure there is a role for digital content. Absolutely. I think we are in a digital age and teachers use that. But I mean, I think the pedagogy of digital content is very interesting. And it's quite, that's why the scale of the rollout of Oak is really worrying. If you're going to do this, you would do it on a small scale. You would evaluate it properly. And then you would learn the lessons from that evaluation in order to build on with other subjects and other age phases. What's happening here is a massive rollout with insufficient consideration or indeed evaluation of where the effects of, and what were the qualities and what were the areas where Oak could have been a lot better.
I mean, I totally get that. I think the bit I was trying to get at there was when you said style, because I think for me, the connotation I got from that was this idea of sort of a teacher sitting with a PowerPoint or a presentation or whatever it is, and almost sort of direct instruction, in that sense for I mean, basically an Oak lesson. As far as I can tell, most Oak lessons consist of a period of direct instruction, some quizzing, some retrieval, and additional resources to go alongside that. So I guess all I'm trying to say is if that style isn't to the liking of whoever, the NEU or anybody else, how do you change that style with digital content? Because in my head, it's like you'd need like AI or something. You'd need like a completely different radical platform, or I'm not sure how a platform could provide something different to that, if that makes sense, and still have teachers creating the content.
Well, then if that is what Oak is going to be, a series of PowerPointed lessons for teachers to use, then one has to ask the question why we're spending £43 million on it, and is that going to be value for money, and is that going to be useful? If that's the limit of this pedagogy, then we're in problems, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's. I mean, for me, that would be a point about quality rather than style. I think for you mentioned three things, which was quality, content, style. So
yeah,
for me, that was more. I was just there concentrating more on the style element of what the alternative is.
Let me take that then. If what that is PowerPointed lessons which are delivered to pupils and then they go away and do their work, then there are problems about that pedagogy and the style of that pedagogy, aren't there? Because there are many subjects where it is important that there is really good interaction between the teacher and the pupils. The pupils are able to work together. The advantages perhaps of group work and the advantages of lesson styles which incorporate different activities at different times. I mean, so if we're talking about style and you're talking about style, which is the delivery of PowerPoints, then I go back to my question: why are we spending £43 million doing that?
I mean, I think that's a slightly separate issue, because I'm not sure, and this is me just personally talking here, and this isn't me talking as an expert in ed tech, but to provide a ed tech platform that would provide everything you just said in terms of the ability for students to work in groups online, and to collaborate in an online environment. You have all sorts of issues there around safeguarding, around all sorts of issues of how to create the platform.
So why are we creating £43 million for an online environment? Is this because there might be another pandemic?
I mean, I think that's something that certainly I can put to. I mean, I've got representatives of Oak joining me in the second half of the show, Mary. So I'll certainly put that point to them about the finance behind it and how it's spent. I do think that, and again, I would sort of, one question I would ask is, teachers have sort of been involved in the creation of the content. I believe that those teachers have been remunerated on some level. So I think perhaps, and I perhaps think that if and I have spoken to some of the teachers who've created the resources, they probably wouldn't see it as just like that they haven't put any more thought in it than here's a PowerPoint and I'm going to read off it.
Well, I didn't say they would. I was responding to your depiction of what it might be and asking, well, if that is it, then is it £43 million? I'm sure they wouldn't do that. But why does that need DFE funding to the tune of £43 million? Why has it been decided that all the subjects will be covered without a proper evaluation of the work done on a few subjects? I mean, why have we got this sort of massive rollout across every curriculum subject to the level of this funding, why aren't we taking a more measured approach?
But do you think that there is value in having a central resource point for all teachers where they can go and get high quality resource and sort of curriculum guidance, and even if it's just in a skeleton manner?
Well, you put the word high quality. So there's two things going on there, isn't there? That it has to be high.
I mean, they would argue it's high quality. I mean, I'm not.
Well, I'm sure they would. I'm sure they would.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not one to be the author of that, but I mean, their aim would be to produce a one-stop shop for, they would argue, high quality curriculum resources, and to have one. I mean, if to have that sort of central pot, if you like, where any teacher can go and access something, I mean, that's free. Do you think there's value in that?
Well, it depends, doesn't it? I mean, it's sort of we're speaking. You're putting a sort of case to me, which is at best unproven. It depends, A, whether it is high quality, and B, whether that one resource is, for example, in art subjects like history or like English, whether that resource is sufficiently robust in terms of its depiction of the complexities of various issues. We've already seen recently with Pearson the quarrels you can have around a textbook around a particular war that's the Israeli-Palestine conflict. So these are serious ethical issues. They are serious moral issues, and they are serious also professional issues, because one of the things that teachers do is work to develop curriculum materials, and that's an important part of their practice. Now, it would be very bad, wouldn't it, if teachers felt that that was not allowable and not achievable because they were expected to use government approved materials, and they were expected to teach in particular ways. That would be a very stultifying thing on the profession. So I go back to my original point. What I would have expected the DFE to do, if this was such a good idea, was to do a gradual funding and then proper research into how it was used. Does it stymie professional development? Does it stymie curriculum development and practice? It would be an iterative process. That's not what's happening.
But do you think that just by the very nature of when Oak was set up, like in the middle of the pandemic, that was never going to be the case anyway? Like, it was set up within weeks, wasn't it? Within months, say. And there was
and as Caroline has said, it was needed then. The issue is it doesn't need. The issue is this. This is £43 million of public money. It doesn't, just because it was set up quickly in a matter of weeks to deal with a crisis, a coronavirus crisis, doesn't mean that the same model now has to be done just with loads of money and very, very quickly.
Do you sort of, I know David Blunkett produced a report for Keir Starmer a few weeks ago. And in that report, he stated he would support, his plan would be to support the continued expansion of resource platforms like Oak National Academy. And this would include providing more pupils with access to quality lessons with the added benefit of reduced pressure on staff. Do you disagree with David Blunkett and sort of that's a Labour report?
Well, I don't think it really matters which government report it is. I don't think what David Blunkett was saying is at odds with what I'm saying. I'm saying that these materials and this approach may well have some use. What it shouldn't be is it shouldn't be omnipresent. It shouldn't be the only thing that teachers are expected to use. They shouldn't be inspected on it, and that the capacity has to be there for teachers to make a range of choices. And finally, and I've got to go in a minute, Tom.
Yeah,
it has to be good quality. It has to be good quality. And so, why the rush? Where is the articulation of need? Where is the idea that this is what teachers want? How has that been investigated? Do we know that it actually reduces workload? What are the qualities of these materials? What is the outcome in the classroom? How are teachers using them? And what effects do they have in terms of learning? Now, if you're going to do it properly, you would you would do proper research into that before you embarked on this massive experiment. And that's not what's happening.
Can I ask you one final question, Mary, before you go?
You can.
This is a tweet that's come in from Tom Bennett.
Yeah, I saw the tweet.
He says, why is a union siding with big business that makes money from teachers over an initiative teachers love, and that is proven to help lower workload? What would you say to that?
I would say all those things are suppositions. I mean, how does he know that teachers love it? How do we know it lowers workload? And I'm not siding with anyone. I'm siding for teachers being given the dignity and choice of their profession in order to be able to develop curriculum materials and use a range of curriculum resources that they find useful. Now, if that is an online national platform, that's fine. But the way this is being developed in this haste, it is unfortunately too likely that this will not be what is needed for teachers in terms of reducing workload, and there will be doubts about the quality of what is produced. What is the rush? Give it time and do it properly.
Thanks so much for your time, Mary. Really appreciate you coming on. Thanks a lot.
Thanks now.
See you later. Ta-ra. Caroline is still here. Caroline, you can unmute yourself.
Hello.
This episode of Teachers Talk Radio has been made possible with support from Witherslack Group, the UK's leading provider of SEN education and care. They're here to support you too through an ever-growing offer of free resources, including webinars, podcasts, articles, and events aimed at supporting teaching professionals like you. Visit their website at www.witherslackgroup.co.uk to find out more.
If you're listening to this, then we know we share one thing in common: a passion for the type of outstanding education that every child deserves. That's what makes us the leading provider of specialist education and care. We need people like you to help us achieve even more. With us, you'll be given all the resources and support you need, offered a clear path to career progression, and be rewarded with some of the best salaries and benefits the industry has to offer. We are Witherslack Group. If you'd like to find out more, we'd love to hear from you. Visit www.witherslackgroup.co.uk/careers and be part of our future.
Hi there.
Hello. I wondered if, from your perspective, Director General of BESA, is there anything you would sort of add or disagree with Mary on, or are you sort of on board with everything she said?
No, I very much agree with the comments that Mary's made, particularly the points about the move Oak from what was a COVID emergency response into an arm's length body and all that means, and the money that's coming from the public purse when actually there was very little research and evidence to actually point to the reason why. So that's one of the key issues for us as well. It's unevidenced on the basis of what Mary and others have said. It's unwanted by the teachers, and it's unfair because it didn't carry out and follow due process.
Do you know it's unwanted by the teachers though?
Well, I'm just reading Oak's own report, and it said, I think, I'm talking in rounding up the figures, but I think it was something like 32,000 teachers currently use it every week. About 70 odd percent would recommend it. So that works out to about one teacher per school. And when you do the maths on what 43 million works out per year per user, you're talking about £500 per user cost. Now, coming from a commercial background, that's really an inefficient use of public funding. So on that basis, I would say it's unwanted. And I'd be interested if you asked many head teachers if they had £500 per user, what they would spend it on in terms of curriculum resources.
Am I right in saying that one of BESA's, and by the way, is it BESA or BESA? I don't know.
However you like it, but BESA, we say.
Okay, so with BESA, like from what I've read about the sort of challenge from BESA to the DFE over Oak, a lot of it does sort of revolve around competition. and sort of the monopoly that BESA feels that Oak has over educational publishing. Would that be right? Or I don't want to misquote.
No, it's a whole range of things. So it's the issues that Mary raised. It's damaging to curriculum choice and diversity, and the range of curriculum resources that will be available in schools. It's damaging to teacher autonomy, and it's damaging to industry. It's going to damage innovation. It's going to damage the market itself, which, when I think kind of one of the questions you sort of said, was it big business? Actually, the vast majority of companies that work in the UK's educational publishing business are technically SMEs and startups. They're typically teachers that had a good idea teaching in the classroom, made something that really worked, went on to produce it, and now kind of a small companies that, you know, work with a few hundred to a few thousand schools at a time. But there's a really vibrant ecosystem of them. And actually, it's one of the growth areas of the UK economy, which brings back money to the economy. And also, because many of them are teacher-based, they work with schools. They know what the challenges are. So you've got that diversity and choice, rather than a kind of one-size-fits-all offer that won't kind of reflect all that what teachers need.
I mean, would you say that with regards to, I mean, as much as I do take on board everything you've just said, but we also know there are very, very large education publishers, whether they're part of BESA or not. There's some very large outfits out there. I can think of one in particular which profits greatly from the sale of resources and the sort of and I guess teachers buying resources and
Yeah.
there are companies that there
absolutely, because there is no such thing as free, and that's actually an issue which I think is really tainting this conversation. In the Butler Education Act of 1944 talks about education being free at the point of use. So in a state education system, you either have a government that trusts its teachers and gives the funding to individual schools so that head teachers and classroom teachers can use it to buy and know what works best in their classroom, or you can have that funding being used directly from government to dictate what teachers use. So it's all paid for by the taxpayer. So there is no such thing as free. But the difference here is free resources provided by Oak, but no choice, no autonomy, or funding going direct to schools so teachers can choose. And when you actually look at the amount of money that goes into UK schools, currently, we are at a level below that of 2009, 2010, being provided by government to schools and used in schools on resources. And actually, using kind of the Bank of England projections and so on, we would need an additional £3,000 per primary and £43,000 per secondary just to level peg with where we were in 2009. So that's why it's important. And actually, I think that probably puts into account a little bit of there aren't huge profits in the sense of the curriculum. The whole size of the digital market in the UK, we estimate to be about £120 million. Now, that's digital publishing. It doesn't take into account sort of textbooks and so on. But it's not a huge industry. And actually, in the vast majority, it's teachers who work with publishers or publishers who were teachers to try and do the right things for schools.
We've had a text in from Adam Smith who says, I'd say to Caroline that £500 per primary school wouldn't buy a single scheme of work from a commercial publisher for a year, but would allow them to access resources across all subjects from Oak in perpetuity. Would you agree with that or not?
Not necessarily, because different publishers and different providers have a whole range of different solutions and different models for schools. And actually, that's the benefit of our UK market as it currently is, that there are hundreds of different providers that can provide special and subject associations as well, not-for-profits, charities, a whole vibrant industry of experts that can support schools. And what the government has done without carrying out, because their business case, they did not look into the market impact before they secured the funding for Oak. As they've been going along, they've been adding different research, but they actually secured the funding without carrying out the due diligence on this. There's a case study of this very similar thing happened in Poland, and in 1 year, just 1 year, 10% of the publishing industry in Poland went bankrupt. So the challenge of this is we live in a climate where, frankly, we don't know who the Prime Minister is going to be from one month to the next. We don't know what's going to happen to the economy. We don't know what's going to happen with different governments, whether they might support the continuation of, £43 million being spent on an army of 80 bureaucrats from 1 year to the next or not. But actually, the damage this could do, we've estimated on our own market analysis, which we wanted to share with government, but they only came to us after they'd made the decision. The market distortion that this could lead to is about 30% of damage to the UK publishing industry. And at that point in a few years' time, when who knows where we are, this is being reviewed in a couple of years' time. If the government of that time decides that actually it isn't a sensible use of value for money, we might be in a situation where there isn't that innovative, vibrant industry to be able to support the teachers in the UK.
Talking of innovative educational publishers, I want to give a shout out to our sponsors. So we've got John Catt Educational, and this show is brought up in partnership with John Catt, who are a leading publisher of books, directories, educational guides and magazines, specifically aimed at schools in the UK and beyond. If you haven't checked out their latest offerings, go to johncattbookshop.com and explore their full range of titles and advance your professional development today. And also this show is brought to us by Witherslack Group, who are a leading provider of specialist education and care, and they need people like you to help them achieve even more. If you want to get involved with Witherslack, they offer a clear path to career progression, and you can be rewarded with some of the best salaries and benefits within education. And Witherslack currently has brilliant career opportunities that are available through their website at witherslackgroup.co.uk/careers. Caroline, I want to read you a comment from Neil, who says, free, independent, non-compulsory, coherent resources written by experts offered at a time when teachers have considerable challenges to workload. What rationale is there for trying to stop free, high-quality resources from getting into the hands of teachers? Now, I'm pretty sure I know what you're already going to say to that, which is what you've already said, which is that the taxpayer has paid that 43 million in. But what I would say is that, do you think that individual schools having to try and figure out and buy separate products from separate edtech providers, some of which may be of completely varying quality, and I can only think of the amount of money that schools have blown on edtech or publishing products that have been of poor quality over the years? It must be in the bazillions. Do you think there is an argument to say, well, hang on, let's have, obviously David Blunkett thinks so, because he's talking about the expansion of Oak, not just the continuation of it, but the expansion of platforms like Oak that provide this one-stop shop, if you like, of resources. Do you not sympathise with that?
Well, frankly, they already exist, and that's one of the big issues. But for free. And again, free is not, it's not free at the point of use. It's free at the point of use whether the money goes direct from government to a school or whether the government buys it themselves. So that just doesn't add up in this conversation. Actually, it's about giving teachers the choice and an autonomy to be able to choose. And actually, there's a real need to be able to have a wide range of providers. And there's been a lot of work that's happened over recent years in terms of edtech evidence and helping companies being able to evidence the impact their products and services have. So there are platforms that already provide support and the chance for teachers to try before they buy resources. We actually run a platform in association with government on that called LendEd, where teachers can take out free trials so they do use things and they do get testimonials from other teachers. A lot of what you're talking about is actually linked to CPD and helping teachers better understand how to use resources and be better equipped. But what I did want to just challenge a little bit is you're talking in the sense of £43 million and the sort of sense that that's going on amazing resources that schools are going to be able to benefit from. It's actually only £8 million. The rest of that goes to funding this bureaucracy of 80 staff when teachers and schools are facing really challenging issues of whether they can actually afford to keep their staff. That just feels completely the wrong way around. actually looking at what's already available in the market, which is what is actually supposed to happen. There's guidance for setting up an arm's length body that says all possible alternatives have to be considered. Market impact has to be considered. That just was not done before March when these decisions were made. And that's what's wrong. This is what government should have done before imposing this. And as Mary said, these kind of very tight timescales, where actually the chances of getting quality resources, the small amounts over and above kind of the 80 staff that's actually going to be spent on resources, is a real challenge. A good product typically takes 18 months to 2 years to develop.
Do you think, though, there's an argument? I mean, I speak now when I've been teaching in different schools, is that quite often, number one, money can be siphoned off into different areas by the school because they simply can't prioritise curriculum resourcing over other things they have to do. That would be number one. But number two is, as a teacher, the number of times I've been at home on a Wednesday night at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, and I've gone, oh God, I need, I've forgotten about this lesson, or I've got to plan this sequence of lessons, or I need something for this week on X and I just haven't got it, and whatever. And then I've gone and I've actually bought it off an educational resources site, or I've spent an hour trying to find things on YouTube or on other sort of platforms that provide, digital content, and sort of the ease of a one platform approach. Surely that can't be underestimated.
And that's exactly what hundreds of high quality curriculum publishers do. They have scaffolded, sequenced products that can help teachers deal with the challenges of workload. The point, and I haven't seen the evidence necessarily on workload, so I'm not disputing it, but it would be interesting to hear more about it. The Oak evidence on saving time on workload.
Well, Caroline, we will, because I've got
that's
Dando from Oak coming on.
But
just
actually,
after you.
that's not to say that other publishers aren't doing that. Again, there hasn't been a gap analysis that exists. Actually, the big two problems that you just talked about there, if you look at if you think about how government is trying to influence schools, actually the lever they have is by investing in a platform, and then the lack of funding in the system will make sure, and the Ofsted's endorsement of Oak will make sure that teachers have a fear factor in using it. But actually, you talked about siphoning off. I'm not sure I'd really like that kind of those words, but the money will be spent elsewhere. Well, absolutely, because there are other priorities in schools, and actually school leaders and classroom teachers and the leadership team within a school are best placed to decide where the money's spent. So although I might be disappointed that the publishers, it's a relatively small amount at the end of the day, but if the size of the pie they have to take some really important decisions, well, so be it. Don't force them into kind of deciding for them. Let them decide. If you want them to use more high quality curriculum resources, well, give them the funding for it. And in terms of, like I said, on that workload, there are already these products and services that many schools know, use and trust and have had training on. And because of the cuts in funding and because of the pressure schools are under, you're actually going to add to some of schools' workload when they really can't afford to renew their subscription to something that they know delivers results in schools, and they'll move over to something that perhaps they might not want to use as much. We've already seen research we've carried out that 30% of primaries and 20% of secondary schools indicating that they will feel forced to use Oak, and that's not out of their desire to use it, it's because of other pressures in their schools.
Listen, I mean, I think what you're saying is all sort of fair argument. I think one question I would, and this has actually come from Adam as well. Adam Smith's text this in, and I won't mention the name of the company, but a company turned over, educational resources company turned over 42 million in 2021. That money has come straight out of the public purse and is in an annual recurring transfer of wealth from the public sector to private profit. Oak is investing in curriculum development for the benefit of schools, making it free to access. There would, as I said before, there would definitely be a strong argument to say that a lot of the companies that are currently making a lot of money out of teachers and schools are not are private enterprises, limited companies making massive profits from resources that are not really audited in many ways. I mean, I'm sure these companies would say, oh, they're fantastic, and I get that, and I'm sure a lot of them are, but they're not audited. They're not like...
Well, they have
not...
audited accounts if you're a company.
Oh, no, I don't mean money. I'm not talking about the money.
But they
I'm not
also,
talking about the money. I'm talking about the quality of the
biggest
product.
audit that any commercial publisher has is the fact that a teacher has to decide to spend money on their resource. And you know how tight budgets are in schools. I would say that's the biggest audit you can possibly have, whereas a £43 million quango that is only being looked at after a 2-year review hasn't evidenced what it's doing, hasn't kind of proved that it's really what schools want, didn't follow the process. I would say that's all audited. We haven't had the Departments for Education referring, even after all the market distortion that's been flagged, we have not seen the department refer this to the Competitions and Markets Authority for an investigation, an independent investigation, which frankly is the very least that I would expect. So I think we need to be careful when we're talking about who's auditing who, because if schools do not want to buy curriculum publishing resources, they won't, and then a company will go out of business. That's not the case in a quango that it's employing 80 people and actually using £35 million of its funding on bureaucracy rather than resources.
Just to cut in there with another tweet that came in earlier from Tom Bennett, and Tom tweeted in, BESA has been saying that 30,000 teachers using Oak each week isn't good enough, or the fact that not everyone finishes the videos to the end shows that they're not very good. What does good, in inverted commas, look like for BESA members' products? Yeah, that was the question.
And it will mean completely different things for each individual member, because they provide a huge variety of resources, from special education needs to music to maths to English to highly gifted and talented to helping support catch up, for a whole range of things. And that in itself is the beauty of our market system at the moment, that actually we can work with schools and talk to them about what does success like and tailor and tweak the products accordingly. There is no one size fits all in the sense of, a global what does good look like. But what I would say is good does not look like a poor value for money of £500 per user.
Does it need to be an either or? I mean, can Oak not exist within, like it is now, within the ecosystem of other businesses and companies and private entities and even other government agencies?
But it's not a fair and level playing field. If it was just another commercial provider that has to compete against everybody else, well, may the best company win. But it's not. It has the endorsement of government. It's a quango, so quasi-government department in effect. It's having the chief inspector of schools encouraging schools to consider using it, saying that it will be aligned with Ofsted research. That is not the role of government, to encourage the use of a particular resource. And that's one of our issues with unfair state subsidy. So it's not a fair and level playing field, and that's what's going to damage the market in the long term. And that's such a shame when we've got it really truly is one of the world leading industries we have, and those resources are provided into our schools. We're still seeing at the moment, the government have said this is one of the issues, that it should be carrying out this research and making sure it's absolutely right before they get the approval for the funding and before they go ahead with things, as Mary said. We currently have, only after we really had to make the point, many months after we should have, that Oak and the Department for Education have agreed to geo-block the website so it can just be used in the UK. That still hasn't been done. They've said they'll do it, but they still haven't done it. And every day,
Caroline,
British companies...
Can you explain that issue to me, just for everyone listening?
Yeah, sure. So if you remember back to sort of the early 2000s, and there was a BBC initiative that was found to sort of... I don't know all of the details of this. It's before my time at BESA, but there was a disagreement about sort of government funding of a big curriculum platform. One of the things that the BBC have done rightly is they have some resources that are available for schools to use, BBC Bite Size, but it's geo-locked. And, their kind of TV programmes are geo-locked to the UK. So they don't compete with UK companies doing some really excellent work internationally and bringing back revenue for the UK economy, and we certainly need it at the moment. That hasn't happened. So we now have a government arm's length body that isn't geo-blocked. So actually other governments, other schools around the world can access content that would be provided by companies that are in high demand around the world. And that's damaging the British economy, let alone just the educational publishing industry. It's damaging all of our economic worth by the fact that they haven't done that yet. And that's just one example of they should have done their homework.
Why do you think why do you think they haven't done that?
Oh, goodness knows, you have to ask them. But we've been raising that before the actual plans for the arm's length body were put in place, over a previous procurement that the DfE overlooked doing that. So it's just kind of doing their homework properly and consulting and engaging with industry, which they don't seem to want to do, unfortunately.
Do you, though, acknowledge that, and this sort of fits in with that, because whether you're an international teacher or a domestic teacher or whatever, you know, teacher's a teacher, and do you sort of acknowledge that teachers spend a lot out of their own pocket? They still spend a lot out of their own pockets for sort of different resources, whether it be, you know, webinars, whether it be physical resources, books, you know, whatever it is, they're spending. So this is something where
they shouldn't have to. Schools should be funded properly. Let me
say that this doesn't even need to be used by a teacher who works in a school at a particular time. This could be used by a supply teacher. You know, at the moment, I work supply. I wouldn't have access to what an individual school has on offer. I wouldn't have that. But I may still benefit from using Oak National Academy, you know, because it's free to access. There's no sign-in required. There's no, you know, there's no sort of walls or barriers for me to use that content. So do you think there's just that sort of value, that wraparound value for everyone in the profession, you know, whether you're a tutor, a teacher, or whatever, that there's more value than what we're saying than just, you know, a teacher who is sort of conventionally using it to set a homework or something?
I absolutely agree that financing school resources should not come out of teachers' pockets, and actually we should be funding schools effectively so that doesn't have to happen. I think it's a slight sort of misnomer to look at, well, let's have Oak as a platform to do that. There are many other options, and in fact ways that and systems that were proposed to the DfE, but I'm not sure if they're actually considered, even though they're supposed to be. You have to look at all the other options before you decide to set up an arm's length body. But it can be curriculum, ring fencing of resources. There could be e-credits, vouchers that are allocated for every sort of qualified teacher that they can choose their resources. There's a whole way that you could do this. Doesn't have to be a kind of a one size fits all. Let's have a platform and let's call it Oak. There are already existing wide variety of resource providers, subject associations, MATs, who are doing this without needing to spend £43 million.
What would you say to the teachers who currently use Oak, who say it helps them to reduce their workload and it helps them to teach and plan?
Well, I would say that's great, because what we're not proposing, let's just remember, we're not proposing taking off the content that's already there and has already been paid for. And actually, if you just look at what John Coles from United Learning's done with Continuity Oak, he fundamentally disagreed with the government intervention and overstepping the mark and interfering in curriculum autonomy. So they've actually taken their content off the Oak platform and put it on something called Continuity Oak. Great. That's done at a fraction. I doubt very much he's spending £43 million on that. Fine. The money we have spent, going back to the beginning, congratulations and well done. And it was a really vital service. My own members, they also donated £24 million worth of curriculum resources in the first 3 months of COVID alone. You know, so those resources, it was a time of national crisis. Let's keep them there. But actually, let's not add to the damage that will be done now. We're supposed to be building back better and reinvesting in education. There is no need for this in the future. There are better ways to achieve that.
Just a final question, Caroline, and thanks so much for spending the time talking to me tonight. I really do appreciate it. Final question is, what do BESA members want to happen now? You know, in purely practical terms, if tomorrow you could click your fingers Thanos style and everything went to some form that you'd be happy with, what would it be?
Oak should get on the phone to John Coles at United Learning, find out how he is managing to fund keeping the continuity Oak content there for teachers, parents, students to access without spending £43 million in 2 years. Keep that going and get the government to reinvest that £43 million by working collectively and collegiately with the system leaders, MATs, unions, publishers too, subject associations, to actually spend it on what schools need rather than trying to impose a solution where it's not wanted.
Caroline, thanks ever so much for your time tonight. Really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on Teachers Talk Radio.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Just a reminder, everyone there, I'm going to be joined by Jonathan Dando in a second, who is Director of School Support and External Relations at Oak National Academy. It's going to be really interesting to talk to Jonathan about a lot of the things that have been raised in the show so far. If anybody has missed any of this, we started at 7:30. If you want to listen back, it'll be available as a podcast on the Teachers Talk Radio website, ttradio.org/listen back. It'll be available tomorrow if you want to listen back to it as a podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or any of those other providers. Again, a shout out just while Jonathan gets ready to join us. A shout out to our sponsors on the show today, John Catt Educational and With a Slack Group, who support the show tonight. And thank you ever so much to every single person who is tuning in. We've got Kat, we've got Tom Rees, we've got Adam, who's been here since I was going to call it the bitter beginning then, like the bitter end, but I mean from the start. Thank you, Adam. Amy, Eleanor, Mr. B, who is a regular TTR listener, welcome. Miss Evans, regular TTR listener. Sarah, one of our fellow TTR hosts. God, I could literally spend all evening ruling out the names of everyone and everyone who's dropped in too. Jonathan, good evening to you.
Hi, Tom. How are you doing?
How are you doing? Are you okay?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm very well. It's been a really interesting listening into your speakers today.
Yes, I'm sure you are. I mean, what have your initial thoughts been?
Well, the thing is, there's quite a lot here that we all agree on, and that's what I want to start on. And that's the thing that I think I'm finding a bit of a challenge, is that there's so much noise around Oak at the moment, and we understand that, and we understand there's a bit of controversy here and controversy there. But actually, what we need to do is take a bit of a step back and look at why Oak is existing, what it's trying to do, and then what are the kind of measures and things we've put in place to safeguard against some of the things that both Caroline and Mary mentioned. They are things that I just want to be really honest. Like when Oak went in this transition through from being this amazing initiative set up and created by teachers at the start of the pandemic to now its future, we thought really hard and really carefully about that. And we worried about many of the same things that Caroline and Mary have been worrying about. But what we've done is we've worked really hard at making sure we've put lots of things in place to stop any of those adverse things happening or to reduce them as far as possible. And I'm really confident what we've got now is something that teachers really want, they really value, and it's going to make a really big difference. I'm really happy to run through a bit of what's the problem we're trying to solve and why we're doing it, because I think that was a bit of a kind of question, particularly from Mary, is like, what's the problem we're trying to solve here? But I don't want to kind of jump straight into a
look, there will be time for that, Jonathan. There will be plenty of time for that, absolutely. I wanted to start though, because I think one of the key criticisms is not sort of the content that's available necessarily, although I think one of Mary's criticisms was that she said the content, the quality, and the style. They were her three things. But I think Caroline's point was more along the lines of, and I don't want to sort of, quote from her without her here, but I think to paraphrase a lot of what she said, it was the fact that 43 million, number one, a lot of money has been spent on Oak and will be spent on Oak, that it has not been open to sort of competition. It's been decided by the government. They've said, right, we're investing all this money into this thing called Oak National Academy, huge sums of money, 80 people working in Oak, and the resources on sort of, I guess, what some people would consider to be good enough for that level of investment. That's how some of the criticism is characterized, rather than necessarily just about the quality of it or what Oak's trying to do?
Yeah, so let me take that from, there's two bits of that, right? So what's
Yeah.
happened to date and what's going to happen in the future. So if you're right, I'll take that in two parts.
Yeah,
So
go for it.
what's happened to date? So take us back, oh my gosh, March 2020, pandemic hits, schools say to the majority of pupils, you can't come in, we're going to have to teach you online. For those most in need, you can come in. As we all know, the history of Oak, won't rehearse it too quickly, a group of teachers and folks working in educational organisations got together and launched this thing from idea to initiative in 10 days. It then kind of was very clear that that disruption was going to continue on for a long time, and government very quickly, to its credit, rolled in and provided support to this. That needed to happen very quickly because we all were facing things and we were dealing with a complete unprecedented situation of the pandemic. At that point, they gave us about kind of £5 million over that first year. And during that time, we created the majority of our 10,000 lessons in around 3 weeks. And teachers used them significantly. Just unfortunately, like if we could have done a proper open procurement process, that would be absolutely right. There just wasn't the time because we had a pandemic that we had to respond to. And the thing is, we had an offer that teachers were finding really valuable and using. So much so that during that time, 150 million lessons were completed by teachers. So that's there. Move forward, what happens? Well, actually, as the kind of pandemic starts to wane, what we're seeing is ingenuity from teachers who say, hey, this stuff from Oak actually is really helpful for lesson planning and for curriculum planning. And they're using it more and more and finding it really valuable. And to kind of cover off some of the quality questions, well, actually, it is found to be really good by teachers. So we've had 2 independent evaluations. It's pretty good for an organisation that's only existed for 2.5 years, all carried out not by us at Oak, but carried out by Impact Ed independently. The last one found a whole variety of things, but 95% of users said they were very satisfied with the content that we provided. So like that is showing that there is really good quality stuff there. The teachers are really happy with it. Now into the future, what's going to happen? So we're going to take some. We've got to focus basically on a couple of things. Number one, we're going to keep doing what we've always done. We're going to be there for teachers in the case of disruption. Disruption hopefully won't look like pandemics going forward, but it will look like things like Storm Eunice. When that Storm Eunice hit, we had 4 times the number of people coming onto the platform. And it will look like things like exclusions. It will look like things like illness, cover, long-term sick. And so we're going to be there to support teachers, to support supply teachers, cover teachers, whenever they need them. But we're also going to do 2 other things. We're going to help tackle teacher workload, and we're going to support curriculum expertise. And we're going to do that through investing in creating new content. Now, one of the things that's really important to call out here is this £43 million, how's it going to be spent? Well, yes, £8 million in this first procurement, but then there'll be another set of procurement later. So it's not fair to say just £8 million of that is going on that. And that's really important because that is money, not for Oak, but investing in all those people who create content. And a load of them are actually Caroline's members at BESA. That they are open and can bid for this, as can subject associations, as can schools. What we're doing is investing in what's in the education system and helping people to develop it and share it to all other teachers as well. We also need money for that because there's a whole bunch of other stuff, some of which you alluded to. Yes, we've got to create that content, but we also have to then do a whole bunch of other stuff. When you get the amount of visitors that we get, you have to pay quite a lot of hosting fees. You've got to put subtitles on it. You've got to put British Sign Language on it. You've got to build the platform. We got last year about 2,500 queries from teachers, and we responded to about 95% of those within 48 hours. So like this is not just a put it on a website.
But Jonathan, one of the I'm just gonna cut in there. One of the sort of criticisms there would be that would apply to a whole plethora of education publishers and providers of materials. I mean, the idea that it's used a lot. I mean, many ed tech providers could argue that their content is used a lot, that they get a lot of inquiries to the website, and that they get a lot of clicks on. I mean, many providers could argue that. So I think one of those criticisms is that £43 million to critics sounds like a lot of money for content that is, as mentioned earlier, when you actually strip it down, they would say, this isn't me saying it, this is what they would say, is a video lesson with an attached PowerPoint or document plan sometimes, and an inbuilt quiz, you know, in the kind of style that many other edtech providers provide. You know, you think of all the quizzing apps out there that many teachers rave about, they already provide that. So what would you say to those people who say, well, you know what, 43 million is too much money for something that isn't particularly innovative or, you know, different to what is already out there?
Yeah, so it's a good challenge. Couple of things. So firstly, I just want to pick up also on one of Caroline's points. She mentioned about how that would work out about £500 per user. That's not right. We get 30,000 teachers every week. That's not the same teacher each week. Some teachers will come 1 week and they'll go away and they'll do their planning, and then they'll come away 2 weeks later. The last national kind of survey that we did, and we do them regularly, found in the last few months a third of all teachers in the country use Oak. So I think that probably works out around 150,000 teachers, something like that in total. So that figure just puts that into context a little bit. That therefore means that the total value of Oak is about £600 for every school in the country each year.
Yeah.
For that money, as I think actually as someone, maybe it was Adam, I tweeted in or texted in earlier, you're getting a full curriculum sequence and a fully resourced curriculum package across every subject. I'm not aware at the moment of any other offer that provides that breadth and depth of support for all of that. So I think that is really, really good value.
Do you understand that? Just to pause there, John, I'll let you carry on your point in a second. But that would be one of the objections, I guess, that Caroline was saying from her members' point of view, that there is not fair competition then on that. That you know, Oak was set up, as you say, in 10 days during the pandemic, and since then it's almost kind of evolved without any sort of external say on how it's evolved, if that makes sense.
So,
or sort of external tendering and all that sort of thing.
So there's been lots of external consultation. When we kind of were looking at the future of Oak, we kind of went out and spoke to lots of people across the sector. We spoke to all the unions, we spoke to commercial providers, we spoke to all of our current partners, we spoke to other big multi-academy trusts, and we were deciding what was to do. And you know, there was definitely the question of do we close this thing down, or do we just kind of mothball it as Caroline suggested and just leave those up? But that's a problem because that doesn't help and serve what teachers need. Teachers tell us they really value this, but they want to continue to see it developed and improved. But really importantly, that has to be inside a thriving market. And I absolutely support Caroline in that we want to see a really good thriving market, because Oak isn't going to be right for every school, right? Like, we can't design something centrally that is going to be right for a school perfectly, because we don't know any of the context, any of the local issues, any of the local kind of bits of curriculum that they want to focus on, or any of the challenges or areas of expertise in that school. So Oak needs to be something central which you can then take and adapt. And what we're trying to do is be one option amongst all these others. And what the thing we're trying to really reduce is not taking away from other bits of the market, but it's that time that teachers themselves spend on making resources themselves. It's not taking away from buying something from a brilliant quality provider. If they do that now and a school does that, you should keep on doing that. And we want to see schools funded so they can keep on doing that. But if you're spending hours and hours trying to find that perfect, trying to design that perfect PowerPoint slide and find the perfect diagram for an Oxbow Lake, then actually we might be able to help you with that. And the last thing I'll just say on this is that is exactly what's happening now. So we check this every year, and we're going to publish this stat every year from now on. It's like, how are you using Oak? Are you using Oak for all of your resources and it's the only source, or are you using Oak alongside and taking from other resources as well, potentially from the commercial market? Right now, 0.3% of teachers, so not even 0.5% of teachers, use Oak as their only source of resources. The rest of them use a bit of Oak, then they use a bit of other commercial providers, and they use a bit of other stuff from their school. So like this idea that Oak is kind of going to blow this away absolutely is just overblown, and it's not led by the data.
No, I was saying to a screen and not realizing I wasn't telling anyone else that. Do you think, though, that the schools, and this is what Caroline was saying earlier, the schools are arguing that their budget, they haven't had a choice over that. They haven't had a choice over whether to invest in Oak or not. That has been decided by the DfE on their behalf, and that's where the gripe comes. I also want to sort of read out a few texts we've had in. Mr. B is a head of department. He's texted in saying, does anyone actually use Oak and say it's genuinely impacted their workload positively? ? It might be used for cover now, but as a staple in the curriculum, definitely not. Whereas obviously I think what he's referring to is in the pandemic, it might have been. The lesson PowerPoints might save you in a pinch, but not sure if they're worth that amount of money now that he knows the amount of money. And I do apologise, Jonathan, for unveiling your budgeting. But it is in the public domain.
No, absolutely. It needs to be public. It's a real public body. Absolutely.
Yeah. But what would you say to Mr. B?
So the first question was like, does it make a difference? And so again, we've had 2 independent evaluations of Oak. That's really impressive for an organisation that's only been around for 2 years. The most recent one found that for 42% of users, on average, they saved 3 hours a week using Oak. So that is not a stat cooked up by us. It's a stat independently found that teachers are saving around half of teachers are saving 3 hours a week. You add that up in total across an academic year, across all the weeks in an academic year, that's teachers getting back 3 weeks a year. And what's brilliant about that is they tell us through this evaluation, they're not just, sitting back and having an extra cup of tea, although they probably frankly deserve it, but instead they are using that time to focus in and give them more support to the people who need it the most, their pupils. They're giving extra support to vulnerable kids. They're doing, more follow-up activities. They're checking understanding. They're able to have more time to focus on those higher value things rather than design. And then the second thing that Mr. B asked was around curriculum. Again, go back to the independent evaluation. Two key stats that come out of that. Half of users say being able to see Oak and see the kind of curriculum that we built and the sequences to increase their own confidence in curriculum design. And 47% said that the quality of their school's curriculum has improved. I just want to dig slightly into that, if you give me just one more second.
Yeah, go for it.
Is that how are they using it, right? So, and this is really, really important, because what teachers aren't doing is they aren't just taking Oak and copying and pasting it and trying to plant it in that school, because that wouldn't work, because it's not going to fit their context. What they're doing and what the research shows is they are looking at Oak as a really good example and a model of a really quality curriculum and a quality set of resources. And they are taking the learning from that, learning from it, and then applying bits of it to their own schemes of work, their own curriculum, and helping their own confidence in what they do in their own schools. And that's really important about the impact that we have.
Yeah, Jonathan, I don't know where you are, but your Wi-Fi seems to be wavering very slightly now. I'm not sure if you can stand as close to the router as possible if you're on Wi-Fi, or if you're on 4G, wherever the best signal is. But you're okay. We can still hear you. Yeah, I mean, I sort of, yeah, I mean, I think you're making fair arguments, but just as a pure sort of, I mean, at the moment, Oak's resources, correct me if I'm wrong, are video lessons and adaptable attached PowerPoint plus potentially worksheet. That's what Oak is fundamentally. Would that be fair? And I guess you're developing a curriculum, Matt, to sort of run alongside that. Ooh, maybe Jonathan's gone. Nath, has Jonathan gone, or is it me who's gone? I don't know. It could be me. I don't know, but I can't hear anything now, so I'm just going to keep talking. But I found it really interesting from the perspective of hearing the sort of criticisms of Oak, and I speak as a teacher who used Oak during the pandemic successfully. I streamed lessons from Oak into the classroom. I used Oak to beam in to the students in my classroom. However, since the pandemic, I wonder whether, as Mr. B says, some of the use of Oak has either changed or declined or evolved in a way that doesn't justify the price tag. That's what the critics would say. It's not for me to say whether that's true or not. I think Jonathan's coming back now, but certainly that's what the critics would say. That they're not sure on that. Jonathan, I think we lost you there intermittently. Are you back?
I am back. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I think your connection, I don't know where you are. We can hear you, but I think your Wi-Fi might be giving up slightly.
I've moved on to 4G, so hopefully that gives you a bit more.
Okay, try that.
If I'm cutting out, let me know. It might be my headphones are running out of battery, and in that case, I'll switch.
Will do. You're okay at the moment. So, yeah, I was just saying that the role of what I was saying there, you may have heard or not. Oh, Wales have just scored, by the way, everyone. A little bit of football updates. But one of the things that I was saying was that since the pandemic, the way in which Oak is used has changed. So, during the pandemic, it was used in class much more from my perception than it would have been in the last, say, 6 months to 12 months, where it's evolved into more of your sort of classic resource that a teacher might use to help them plan. Would that be fair to say? It's become less of an in-class resource than it was.
So the great thing about Oak is that it's super flexible and adaptable, and it can be used for a massive wide range of reasons. And that's absolutely what we see. So we continue to see, as I said, it used for just periods of disruption. So for homework, for using the video lesson for things like homework, but also for cover, etc. But absolutely, as you say, seeing more and more teachers using it for lesson planning and curriculum planning. We also see it for lesson delivery. So a teacher might use a clip of one of the videos as part of that. They might bring up our quizzes onto the whiteboard and do an interactive kind of session with their pupils, kind of doing the quiz live in the classroom. We've got worksheets, so teachers will print off and do those. But we also see other really interesting uses coming through as well. So one is around professional development, and that works for a whole variety of different teachers. So sometimes, and we heard through our evaluation, where a teacher is teaching something outside of their specialism. So for example, we heard from a teacher who was a biology teacher by background, but their school had moved to a policy where they had to teach biology, physics, and chemistry. And so they came on to Oak to learn about and see and build up their subject expertise and knowledge on physics and chemistry, so they could feel confident delivering that. I also have a live case study in my own house, literally in the other room here. My partner has just done a big career change and moved away from working in the food industry to becoming a primary school teacher. And she is right at the start of her career, literally in her first term. And so when she is having to work out how to deliver her first lesson on teaching fronted adverbials, she can go on to Oak and watch another high quality, experienced teacher and look at their explanation and think, how am I going to teach that myself? And that is supporting and alongside the brilliant support she gets from her school and her teacher training organisation, but just gives her another kind of string in that bow of development as well.
Okay, I mean, when Mary was on earlier, I don't know whether you heard all of that, but Mary, one of the things that the NEU is saying quite strongly is about the pedagogy. So Mr. Ellis has texted in. Mr. Ellis says, lessons...
Tom, just checking in if you're still with us there, Mr. Rogers.
I'm here. It could be my Wi-Fi now. I don't know. Can you hear me?
Jonathan, are you still with us?
I am, and I can hear Tom clearly.
Nathan, that could be your Wi-Fi.
Just checking in there.
That could be your Wi-Fi. Don't worry. So I was saying that one of the things that Mr. Ellis is texting at the moment, he said, lessons are not PowerPoints. We have been conditioned to teach off Twinkle and Art PowerPoints, and praised for doing so for over a decade now. There's now a generation of teachers who know no better than making PowerPoint presentations is a lesson. Now, do you sort of sympathise with that criticism, or would you just say, well, no, hang on, it's just a resource in the collection?
I actually do really understand that and sympathise with that quite a lot. So let me unpack that a little bit. And this is also gets back to the point of why we're doing this work to recreate what we've got. So what we have currently was created by a brilliant set of over 500 teachers at the height of the pandemic very quickly. It is really good and teachers value it, but it was created quickly and designed first and foremost for a remote teaching and kind of that video lesson. What we want to do now is create a set of resources that are much more flexible and much more adaptable to allow teachers to use them in the classroom for delivery.
So can you give us an example of that in sort of what you've got planned and what's going to happen?
Yeah, so one of the things that we need to think about is how do you encourage and give signals to teachers about, and this goes right to the point of what Mary was saying earlier, of when is it that you need to think about how you're going to deliver this lesson, what are the techniques that you want to deliver, what's your pedagogy, and how are you going to get pupils participating in that. So that could be prompts for start a discussion with your class. It could be prompts for different and examples of different types of activities that you could do. But one of the things we've got to be careful about here is it's not our job to design that for teachers. We don't know your class. We don't know the kids in your class. So we've got to be really careful that we don't actually go too far with that stuff. And we let teachers decide that, because they are best placed and that's their expertise. That's the kind of key bit of professionalism that we've got to support teachers to develop and not to undermine, is for them to make those choices on what's going to work best for the kids in front of them, because they know those kids and we don't.
But in terms of the actual content, I mean, is the actual product going to change in any radical sense, or will it remain, but you'll just build on what's there?
So we're going to recreate. So that's a really good question. So let's go back to that. So like, what we're going to do is we're going to recreate all of the content that we have on Oak, but we're going to do that over a slower period over the next 3 years, making sure we're taking a lot more time to get that really good. That means we'll start off with a really high quality curriculum sequence that carefully shows the progression through the different topics and how pupils will kind of build on those blocks to learn. For each of those building blocks, there'll be obviously various units and then lessons. And then for each lesson, there'll be a set of resources. So slide decks, quizzes, worksheets, and videos. So similar in terms of the kind of product output, but the content of that will be designed very carefully to support in-class delivery, and it'll be supported and developed in a way that teachers can adapt it more easily and kind of flex with it to suit their needs.
Okay, because I mean, one of the sort of, it's something I raised actually with Mary earlier, and I'll ask the same question to you. I guess my question was, and this was more a question to the critics who talk about it on a pedagogical approach of saying it's the style of it. It's the style of the sort of direct instruction, task with PowerPoint, explanation, quiz, attach worksheet to download, that sort of model. And number one, I guess they see that as quite simplistic. But number two, they don't sort of see that as something that's particularly innovative or creative. It doesn't, for example, I think Mary mentioned group work or collaboration. It doesn't enable students to, explore material in a sense. My question to her was, well, what would we do instead? But equally, I guess, there is that argument that it is it's something that isn't particularly, I don't know, like I'm trying to think of the phrasing of it, but some people would not see it as innovative enough to warrant the price tag. That's what the critics would see it as.
So I understand that, but again, I think the really important point here is that Oak is not a finished product, because the finished product is a lesson and only a teacher can design that lesson. What we're giving them is a foundation and some building blocks which help and support them to do that. But it is absolutely right, exactly as Mary says, that sometimes you're going to want to prompt a really vivid and great debate and discussion in your class. Sometimes you're going to want some groups to be working together to kind of solve a problem. Sometimes you're going to want to do a whole bunch of demonstrations in your class. You're going to have music, and you want our kids to sing, to play. You can't necessarily do all of that through what we provide, but that's why what Oak is a toolbox for which you can take the bits that you need to build your lessons from. It is not going to be the full package.
Yeah, I mean, that was sort of my argument to Mary, was that I'm not sure what, given the current sort of technology we have available and the constraints around safeguarding and things like that, I'm not sure what else, whether it's good enough or not. That's not the issue. I mean, the issue for me is, what can anyone else do that's better, if that makes sense? I mean, I don't know the answer to that, but just on face value, unless you were to create some sort of AI environment, which I'm guessing would cost a lot more money than the current sort of budget, unless you could do that, I'm not sure what else you could do different to what's currently on offer.
Yeah, and like, just to come back to your point on cost here as well, is that this is first and foremost the biggest part of our budget is going into investing in content. So it's investing in schools, it's investing in public associations and educational organisations to share and develop what they have. That's going to create around about 15,000 lessons. And as I say, works out about the equivalent of £600 per school for a breadth that will cover all subjects from every key stage as well, from key stage 1 to key stage 4. So I think
when you say £600 per school, what do you mean by that exactly?
Oak's budget is, as you say, £43 million over 3 years. Divide that by 3 and divide that by about 24,000, which is the number of schools in the year. It works out the equivalent of about less than £600.
But is that schools who use Oak, or is that just the total number of schools?
No, that's the total number of schools. But
because obviously there would be that argument that I think 45% on the sort of, I'm just reading an article that was published by TES about this, and I think a private company did a survey on it or something, and it came out there that under half of all schools in England, 45%, use Oak resources at some point during 21-22 academic year. So would you then halve that figure that you've just said?
Obviously, it depends how you want to cut the figures. That's totally fine. That's another way of looking at it. But I think the argument that was being made was we should take this money that exists and we should remove it from Oak and we should give it to schools. And I was saying, well, if you did that, what you would do is you'd give about £580 to every school in the country.
Per school.
Yeah.
I guess they would say, yeah, okay then. They'd say they'd use that 580, 600 or whatever it would be on something else.
But that's
maybe.
Yeah, but I suppose my argument here is like it's really important that we give more money to schools, and everyone was surprised and pleasantly surprised that in the autumn statement there was a really increase in funding going to schools. That's really important. I think it was £2.4 billion a year extra going to schools. That's very necessary and really welcomed. We can do that and do Oak. It doesn't have to be one or the other, particularly when you compare those two costs, right? £2.4 billion per year extra going into schools is absolutely right. £43 million going on to Oak. We also invest in a whole bunch of other things to support teachers across the country. We invest in national professional qualifications, in ICT, and we do a whole bunch of other things to support teachers and make sure there are a whole bunch of other things around that go around the ecosystem of schools. Oak is one of a small number of those things, and actually costs very little in comparison. But I appreciate that, like, at the moment, schools are facing significant pressures, and the most important thing is that we've seen that increase in school funding, and long may that continue.
Jonathan, it's been absolutely brilliant chatting to you. Thank you ever so much for coming on and sort of being a good sport with the questioning and answering it as best you can. I've also got to say a massive thanks to Caroline and to Mary, who came on earlier in the show. This will be available to download as a podcast probably tomorrow through the Teachers Talk Radio website. If you just hit listen back. If you missed any of it or you want to go back and listen to some of it again, then you can do. Big thanks to our partners for the show, which is John Catt Educational and the Witherslack Group. If you want to find out more about them, you have Witherslack Group pinned to the space at the top. You can click on that and sign up for some of their upcoming events, which are completely free, or most of them are. And also John Catt, if you want to visit John Catt, johncattbookshop.com, and see what they've got some really exciting new releases that you should definitely check out, and they've got some discounts on those at the moment too. So big shout out to them. Sarah is coming up in about 3 minutes time for her debut show on Teachers Talk Radio. If you want to listen to that, you just click on the website, click listen live, and then click the play button, and you can listen to Sarah, who is starting in a few minutes time through the website. So, yeah, I just want to say, finally, thanks ever so much to Nathan for adminning and everybody for tuning in this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure, as usual. I will be back, actually, in 2 weeks' time, because Carl Poupe is on next Monday for his second show on Teachers Talk Radio. Really looking forward to that one after his first show the week before last, which was brilliant. So he'll be back next Monday. I'll be back in 2 weeks' time. Thanks all, and keep tuning in and talking it out. And thank you very much, and good night. Thank you, Jonathan. Goodbye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.